You're watching live coverage of the U.S. Senate as they gavel back in here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senator from New Jersey.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I ask unanimous consent that further calling of the roll be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's my understanding that we are now in morning business, and can I ask if there is a time constraint that when making speeches?
Senators are limited under morning business to 10 minutes each.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're facing a moment in the issue that all Americans are looking at and wondering what's happening here. What's going to come about? What are we going to do? But I want to remind everybody, in 1773, a Tea Party was held in Boston Harbor. It was to protest the yoke of oppression that hobbled the start of freedom in our new nation and that new Americans wanted removed. Those here then wanted the liberty to choose their own customs and their way of life. And while that was 238 years ago, we again struggle to keep a fringe group from taking away the rights of a majority of American citizens who treasure the choices they're free to make in our democracy. And all these attempts are marked in the cloak of fiscal responsibility. It's very clear that this group, unlike our forebears, is determined to restrict the freedoms most Americans choose to protect. So while we aren't latter-day Paul Revere's, we sound the alarm for the American people to beware. I come to the floor to warn every parent and grandparent to beware for the well-being of your loved ones. If you want your children and your grandchildren to have the best health care that American research can produce, beware. If your chest swells with pride when your 2-year-old repeats numbers or words learned at Federal Head Start schoolhouses, beware. If your child suffers when toxic air overwhelms them and they're gasping for a breath of fresh air, beware. Look at your family, and if you have a son and a daughter or a daughter anxious, ready, and able to go to college and you can't afford to help, beware. And if you're a woman dependent on Planned Parenthood, where every year women receive tests for breast or cervical cancer that could endanger their health and maybe your life, beware. And if you're a retiree who believes that Medicare is freely available to help you live longer or function better, beware. Watch out. Tea Party Republicans have seized control of the U.S. House of Representatives and will use their power to eliminate current services to children, adults, and retirees from the government as promised. They are continuing to brew a toxic tea, a sleight-of-hand trick to push pain on Americans' most vulnerable citizens. And we look at this placard, House GOP, brewing a toxic tea for America. Across our country, millions are worried sick about losing jobs, losing homes, and losing an established way of life for their children's futures. And what do the Tea Party Republicans propose? Cut their programs to protect the wealth of the richest among us. But the Tea Party Republicans don't want to solve problems. Instead, they're trying to use the budget process to push an extreme ideology that they believe is the only way others should live their lives. Do it their way or no way. They're willing to shut the government down to prove a point, to change the condition that we operated so well under for many years. They're willing to sacrifice Americans' financial standing to impose their extreme views on millions who don't agree with these radical extremists. They refuse to step up, compromise, and move ahead so America can continue leading the world as it has been. The President and the Senate Democrats have come to the negotiating table with a responsible plan that protects our country's fragile economy, economic recovery, and invests in our future. But the toxic tea Republicans in the House would recklessly rather shut down the government than budge off of their foul schemes. Last week, they stood outside the Capitol and chanted, "Shut it down, shut it down." That was their mantra, shut the government down. And when Speaker Boehner told them to prepare for a shutdown, they gave him an ovation. That's where they stand. Cut it off. Cut off the help that America needs to maintain some financial leadership. These are elected lawmakers. They're supposed to guard our government, not kill it. They want to deceive our people talking about arithmetic and accounting, but that's not the real aim. Their aim is to have the government decide what is right or wrong in people's homes and families so that they can govern others' behavior. And make no mistake, they don't care if their cuts hurt children. They've shown that all along the way. They want to chase more than 200,000 children out of Head Start, where children learn how to learn, and modest income families have no other way to provide that education. And we see it here in this placard. House Republicans, they want to hold back 218,000 Head Start kids. That's not going to help our country in the future. Tea Party Republicans ignore the fact that children who attend Head Start have higher test scores and more likely to graduate from high school and go on to college. And they should visit Head Start classrooms. See those little ones Maybe their tough hearts will mellow instead of just saying no. Sorry, with American wealth, we can't help you. But Head Start is only a beginning. Look what the Tea Party Republicans want to do to higher education. They want to reduce Pell Grants, which helps millions of Americans go to college. Don't they understand that they aren't just saying no to hardworking young students? They're also saying no to American employers, telling them, too bad our country doesn't have the skilled workers. Ship those jobs overseas or bring foreigners here. They'll work for much less anyway. And they're saying no to the millions of hardworking parents who dream of seeing their kids living better than their parents because they received a college education. And this chart tells a tragic story about the opportunities for smart kids who depend on Pell Grants to afford college. Look at what it says. College costs rise. House GOP slashes the Pell Grants, and we can see them here. Rising tuition and less help is the way they'd like to see America go. Well, do we really want to force students to take on more debt in order to attend college or kick them off our country's campuses altogether? I learned the value of a government investment in college education firsthand. I attended Columbia University on the GI Bill after serving in the Army during 1944 and 1945. And later I co-founded ADP. That's one of America's most successful companies, now employing 45,000 people. America built the greatest generation by enabling 8 million veterans to attend college free for their service in wartime. And even as we currently continue losing lives in wars that have also injured thousands, they're willing to shut down government, no matter what it takes away on payday for soldiers on the battlefield. And the assault on our children's future doesn't end there. The Tea Party Republicans want to cripple our ability to provide clean air, to provide the clean air our people need to breathe without fear by eliminating the Clean Air Act. It's putting polluters' profits ahead of our children's health. And it's an outrageous assault on a landmark law that the Supreme Court ruled on in 2007, that it's the government's responsibility to protect children from toxic chemicals in the air and illnesses like asthma, lung cancer, among other life-threatening diseases. And I would wish that our GOP colleagues would be straight with the millions of parents who are concerned about their children's health and explain why Tea Partiers are asking families to be patient, and maybe their children will outgrow asthma. One of my grandsons suffers from this disease. He's an athletic child, and every time he goes to a soccer game, my daughter first checks to see where the closest emergency room is. And no parent should have to worry about their children playing outside. And look at this picture. Soot is ugly when it's pouring from a smokestack, but it's even uglier inside a children's lung.
The Senator's time has expired.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be included in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, thank you. I rise today as our federal government is on the verge of a government shutdown in the hope that both sides will come together and pass a resolution which not only keeps the government functioning but also fully funds our troops for the remainder of this fiscal year and enables our troops to be able to have the support that they deserve. It's not sensible, it's not practical, and it's not morally defensible to send our troops to fight for us in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and now in Libya without giving them the resources they deserve. They shouldn't have to worry about their loved ones back home, whether they're going to be able to meet their rent payments, be able to make their mortgage payments, put food on the table even, while they are fighting for our country. I must tell you, I find it really extraordinary that our President, our Commander-in-Chief, has issued a veto threat on the troop funding bill that was passed in the House yesterday and is on the calendar here in the Senate today. Looking at the Statement of Administration Policy, which I have here, the President doesn't talk about concerns over the legislation, doesn't talk about concerns over the spending or the riders. He simply says this bill is a distraction from the real work that would bring us closer to a reasonable compromise. So I'm not quite sure what that means, except by not stating any objections to the legislation, other than saying it's a distraction, I think it's not responsible for our troops and our military. To be honest, I'm far less concerned that passing this bill will be a distraction to the United States Congress and to the President than I am concerned that not passing the bill will be a distraction to those troops who are putting their lives on the line for us overseas every day. As we all know here in this chamber, we shouldn't be having this discussion. We're talking about the funding for this fiscal year only because the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives last year didn't get their work done. In fact, for the first time since 1974, when the Budget Act was made law, the Congress did not pass a budget in either house. And that's why we're here, and that's why the continuing resolutions are necessary, these so-called short-term measures. It's too bad, because Congress not getting their work done last year means we have to clean up the mess this year when we should be focused on a much bigger issue. My colleague just talked about some of his concerns about the spending reductions that he talked about in H.R. 1. I would just remind us that not having gotten our work done last year, we are also facing the biggest deficit in the history of our country and a debt that is unprecedented, over $14 trillion. If we're truly worried about our kids and our grandkids and the next generation, we have to focus on that. But for today, Mr. President, what we're talking about is something very simple. It's just to pass a short-term measure to be able to keep government in operation and, again, to provide the funding for the troops. I would hope that we could do that today. We're talking about actually a relatively small part of that bigger problem I talked about. Even adding up all of the spending reductions in so-called H.R. 1, which is the most ambitious of any of the proposals out there, it's less than 2% of our federal budget, at a time, by the way, when our federal budget deficit is over 40%. So what we're debating today in the Senate and what is being negotiated behind closed doors here in the Congress and at the White House is such a small part of the issue. But here we are. So what do we do? What do we do to make things better and not make the mess worse? The short-term measure that the House has already passed yesterday is unfortunately the only thing we can agree on today, because given the process of this place, the House and the Senate, it's the only option we have to move things forward. We need to send it to the President while we're working on this longer-term legislation. And again, it does provide for our troops, which is incredibly important to us at this time with 3 wars and so much concern and anxiety out there among our military. This measure would reduce so-called non-defense discretionary budget authority by about $13 billion, again, while funding the military fully for the rest of the year. And by the way, many of these reductions were included in the President's budget. These are not particularly controversial changes. In terms of actual outlays, in other words, how much would be spent this year, it reduces spending by $3.9 billion. Now, in the context of our overall federal budget, that's 0.1%. So what we're talking about here today is 0.1% spending adjustment for the rest of this fiscal year. And yet we still can't seem to be able to get together to fund our troops and keep the government open. Some call that 0.1% extreme. We just heard some of that. I don't think it's extreme. I think it's only a first very small step we have to take, again, if we're truly concerned about the future for the next generation and concerned about our economy. Because if we don't get this record deficit and this debt that's growing out of control under control, it will continue to harm our economy today and our prospects for getting this economy back on track into the future. So I say, let's allow these negotiations to continue. In the meantime, let's fund our troops and let's avoid the disruption and the unnecessary disruption of a government shutdown. We can do that, Mr. President, and do that right now as a body by passing the legislation the House passed yesterday, send it to the President for his signature, and be able to take care of our fighting men and women for the rest of this year and keep the government from shutting down. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I have long believed that we have to get serious about the deficit, and I was one of 14 senators who held back their votes on the debt ceiling last year to make sure that we actually created the Fiscal Commission, which did very good work this year, which is now being that work is being taken by a small group of Democratic and Republican senators to come up with some long-term solutions for our debt. I strongly believe that's what we have to do. And I also believe we have a responsibility to govern. And allowing a shutdown when we are this close in negotiations, when really a number has been agreed upon, and all it comes down to is really a disagreement on politics here, is just wrong. And what makes this situation so troubling is that we have reached this standstill, not over dollars at its essence, but over politics that I don't believe have a place in this debate. With a bipartisan deal within reach, it would be irresponsible to shut down the government and punish our constituents solely to score political points. This impending shutdown, as you know, Mr. President, has broad consequences. While we have now seen 13 straight months of private sector job growth, adding 1.8 million jobs in that time, the United States economy is still fragile. Everyone knows that in their own states. Too many Americans continue to struggle. According to an analysis from Goldman Sachs, a government shutdown will cost the economy around $8 billion per year, or nearly 0.2% of GDP for each week of the shutdown, all because of a disagreement over social issues, right? Not over dollars, because last night, according to all who were at that meeting, there was actually an agreement on the dollars. Economists and business leaders agree that a government shutdown at this time will hurt our recovery, hurt businesses, and slow economic growth. Even Speaker Boehner has admitted it will cost more than it saves. If a shutdown were to occur, the Small Business Administration would cease to process applications for business loan guarantees, curtailing lending to small businesses already squeezed by the tight credit markets. Last year, the Small Business Administration supported more than $22 billion in lending to small businesses through its two largest loan programs. At these levels, we would see over $400 million a week in small business lending put on hold because of a shutdown. Our government also provides vital support for businesses seeking to export their products and services and conducting business abroad. The U.S. Commercial Service, a part of the Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, has offices in embassies and consulates in over 80 countries worldwide and utilizes its global network of trade professionals to connect U.S. companies with the international buyers. Every year, they help thousands of United States companies export goods and services worth billions of dollars. If the federal government shuts down, these services will end and sales and contracts will be lost. And if you don't believe me, look at the shutdown in 1995. We can see the evidence of how damaging a disruption of services like these can be. During that shutdown, approximately $2.2 billion in U.S. exports couldn't leave the country because the Department of State and the Bureau of Export Administration were unable to issue export licenses. Finally, I'd like to make a point about visas, since I chair the Subcommittee on Export Promotion, Competitiveness and Innovation, which includes tourism. During the last shutdown, approximately 20,000 to 30,000 applications by foreigners for foreign tourist visas were unprocessed each day, and the U.S. tourist industries and airlines reportedly sustained millions of dollars in losses. With the average foreign visitor spending over $4,000 per visit, it is easy to see how fast these losses add up for businesses across America. These are just a few examples, but the sum total will be much greater. I am on the bill with Senator Casey and Senator Hutchinson to continue funding our troops. Of course we will do that. Of course they should get their paychecks. But let's look at what this shutdown would really do on a day-to-day basis. To provide some perspective, in northwestern Minnesota, volunteers are taking times off from their jobs and from school to help fill sandbags and build temporary levees as we watch the Red River of the North rise to its eventual crest. The flood flight takes all hands on deck in North Dakota and Minnesota, with local, state, and federal government working together to protect these communities. Earlier this week, to help in this fight, Governor Dayton declared a state of emergency for 46 Minnesota counties. North Dakota has also been declared a state of emergency. FEMA has said that we'll have all the resources it would need and maintain its capabilities during a shutdown. However, if the federal government closes its doors, FEMA will not be able to process in a timely manner paperwork and applications that Minnesotans will be submitting for assistance once the waters recede. I have been through these flood fights before, Mr. President. The whole community comes together. The whole community fights that flood. They take days and days and days. Some of them have lost their houses, and they're still out there helping their fellow citizens. I see that, and I wonder to myself, and we in this body and in this Congress can't come together when we are this close, when there actually was an agreement on a number last night. We can't come together while these volunteers in North Dakota and Minnesota across the Red River are coming together on a flood fight. That is absurd. I urge my colleagues that are holding this up to reconsider their all-or-nothing stance so that we can move forward with the real work that must be done. A setback now would simply prevent the growth needed to address our country's long-term fiscal imbalances. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to add 4 additional minutes to my 10-minute time.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I thank you, Mr. President. I'm aware that most of my colleagues are taking the floor today to speak about the potential shutdown of our government, and very appropriately so, and I am opposed strongly to a government shutdown, as we all are. I especially want to note its adverse effects on our men and women in uniform. And, of course, I've joined so many of my colleagues in co-sponsoring the Enduring Pay for Our Military Act of 2011. The last thing our fighting men and women need and their families is how to make ends meet while they're taking up arms to defend our nation's interests. I want to talk about the deteriorating situation in Libya, which could have more profound effects than the crisis that we are in. It's a very serious, very deteriorating situation, and one which is fraught with severe implications for America's national security interests. I remain a strong supporter of the President's decision to take military action in Libya. It averted what was an imminent slaughter in Benghazi and has given us a chance to achieve the goal of U.S. policy, as stated correctly by the President, to force Gaddafi to leave power. I'm also grateful we have capable friends, our Arab partners, our NATO allies, who are making critical contribution, but that is not a substitute for United States leadership. And right now, that's the main missing ingredient in our coalition's efforts in Libya, the willingness of the administration to take decisive actions together with our partners so that we can accomplish our goal as quickly as possible, rather than look to our allies to do it all themselves, which I fear the evidence is mounting that they cannot do. So the administration has chosen to stop flying strike missions against Gaddafi's forces, even though they continue to threaten Libyan civilians, and even though our NATO allies can't match our unique capabilities in this regard. The administration has correctly declared that forcing Gaddafi from power is a goal of U.S. policy, but our military mission is not working toward that goal by actively seeking to degrade Gaddafi's forces, thereby increasing the pressure on him to leave power. At a time when Gaddafi's forces are adapting to NATO's tactics and capabilities and concealing themselves in populated civilian areas, the administration has grounded our most effective aircraft, the A-10 and the AC-130, which are the only planes that are capable of conducting the kinds of precise air-to-ground operations now required to protect civilians under the current circumstances. Not surprisingly, Gaddafi's forces are now regaining the momentum on the ground. We cannot succeed with half measures, and right now our actions are not adding up to a strategy that appears capable of achieving our goals. To the contrary, we seem to be failing to prevent the situation on the ground in Libya from sliding into a stalemate. Just yesterday, General Carter Ham, the commander of U.S. Africa Command, who led Operation Odyssey Dawn in Libya, told the Armed Services Committee that a stalemate in Libya, where Gaddafi remains in power to pose an even greater threat to the world and to the Libyan people, is not in America's interest or in anyone's interest. But in the same hearing yesterday, General Ham also conceded that the situation on the ground in Libya is, quote, more likely of becoming a stalemate now than when this intervention began. I'm afraid I agree with the General, and I'd like to highlight some of the news that my colleagues may have missed. Yesterday, there was an airstrike that unfortunately the Washington Post, NATO's credibility takes a hit in Libya. Forces loyal to Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi went back on the offensive as questions continued to mount about the credibility and effectiveness of NATO's no-fly zone and campaign airstrikes. A senior U.S. general described the situation in Libya as a stalemate, while Turkey said it was talking to both sides, working on a roadmap for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, in the meantime, Gaddafi is seeking what military advantage he can get and probing for gaps in NATO's resolve. The day also ignited new confusion and outrage among the rebels in Adjabaya after warplanes strafed rebel forces and killed at least 5 people, including 2 doctors. Rebels first accused NATO of targeting them, but by Thursday night it was still unclear who attacked. Abu Fatah Yunus, the rebels' commander, told reporters that if NATO had attacked their tanks, it was a mistake, and if Gaddafi's airplanes had been allowed to strike them, it was an even bigger mistake. The current air war is especially sensitive to the criticism that came most scathingly from the leader of the Libyan opposition force, General Abu Fatah Yunus. He said in Benghazi late Tuesday, and I quote, "NATO blesses us every now and then with a bombardment here and there and is letting the people of Misrata die every day." So we relieved a humanitarian, let's get this straight, my friends, we relieved a humanitarian disaster in Benghazi, and now, because either ineptitude or lack of resolve or lack of capability or all of the above, we are now watching a massacre, certainly human suffering of enormous proportions in Misrata. There's another article from The Guardian, NATO lacking strike aircraft for Libya campaign. The New York Times today editorial, interestingly, the New York Times says, and I quote, "There's a much better option. The American A-10 and AC-130 aircraft used earlier in the Libya fighting is still on standby status. President Obama should authorize these planes to fly again under NATO command. Unlike the high-flying supersonic French and British jets now carrying the main burden of the air war, these American planes can fly slow enough and low enough to let them see and target Colonel Gaddafi's weapons without unduly endangering nearby populations." Facts are stubborn things. The fact is that now the situation is deteriorating, the suffering goes on, and America and our allies appear to be showing that we are incapable or unwilling to address a third-rate military power ruled by a man who has the blood of 190 Americans on his hands, who has been involved in terrorist activities throughout the world, who, when outside of Benghazi said, "We will go house to house and kill every one of you." And the situation is deteriorating into stalemate. So what do we need to do? First, we need to get U.S. armed forces, especially our A-10s and AC-130s, back in the business of flying strike missions against Gaddafi's forces, not just as part of our effort to protect civilians, but to work toward the goal of our actual policy, which is to impose enough pressure on the regime to compel Gaddafi and his family to leave power. Second, the United States should work with our friends and allies to help the opposition government in Benghazi, the Transnational National Council, to gain access to some of the tens of billions of dollars worth of funds that have been frozen from the Gaddafi regime. Third, we need to help the opposition to Gaddafi communicate more effectively while shutting down Gaddafi's ability to broadcast his propaganda. Gaddafi has cut off landlines, mobile networks, and the Internet. While top opposition leaders have satellite phones, we have both humanitarian and strategic interests in restoring the ability of people in liberated parts of Libya to communicate with each other and the rest of the world. We should take steps to get Gaddafi's satellite, television, and radio broadcasts off the air. U.S. diplomacy is urgently needed to get those countries that have satellite providers broadcasting Gaddafi's propaganda to drop those communications immediately. Fourth, the United States should follow France, Qatar, and Italy in recognizing the opposition government, the Transitional National Council, as the sole legitimate government of Libya. You know, I hear again and again, we don't know who these people are. Well, I'll tell you who they are. They're people who rose up against an oppressive and brutal dictator and wanted to assert their rights for freedom and democracy. That's who they are. And any allegation that they're dominated by al-Qaeda is patently false. We didn't know who was going to come after Hitler, but we wanted him gone. So this continuous stream that there's somehow this is al-Qaeda, it's not al-Qaeda. It's people who want freedom and democracy. They rose up peacefully, as the Tunisians did and the Egyptians did, and as others across the Middle East and North Africa are now doing for greater political freedom, economic opportunity, and justice. That's why this regional awakening, what some are calling the Arab Spring, rather than helping al-Qaeda, is in fact the greatest repudiation of al-Qaeda that the world has ever seen. Fifth, we need to facilitate the provision of weapons to the Libyan opposition, as well as command and control technology, training, battlefield intelligence, and other capabilities that can strengthen their ability to increase the pressure on Gaddafi to leave power. And I want to reiterate, I do not support, nor do I believe is necessary, American ground troops under any circumstances. We should be able to, with a combination of the robust implementation of these 5 measures, drive Gaddafi from power and give the Libyan people their God-given rights. I just want to say again that I see on cable time after time about we don't know who these people are and they may be al-Qaeda. I will tell you who they are. They're people who don't want to live under oppressive, repressive, brutal regimes. And the more of a stalemate, the more likely that al-Qaeda forces will infiltrate and gain power. The quicker that Gaddafi leaves power, the more likely it is we will see a dramatic transition. We cannot say that we intervened in Libya to prevent a slaughter in Benghazi only over to see one in Misrata or some other city. But if we stay our present course, that's what will likely happen. We need decisive actions, not half measures. We need to be leading. America must lead. NATO is America. We need to be leading in a strong and sustained way, not sitting on the sidelines or playing a supporting role. We have the right goal in Libya. The President was right to intervene in the first place. But now we need to take the necessary steps to finish the job. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I ask unanimous consent that the articles I refer to be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I rise again today to urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and on both sides of the Capitol to move beyond the unnecessary and distracting partisan bickering and come together to fund our government for the remainder of the current fiscal year, including our military, our early childhood programs, and our essential health services for our seniors and children. 6 months into the 2011 fiscal year and less than 12 hours before a government shutdown would close many of the important services to millions of Americans, Congress has yet to fulfill its most basic responsibility and pass a budget. I know that the people of North Carolina or any state did not send us to Washington to point fingers or blame other people for the challenges our country faces. They sent us here to work with our colleagues on common sense solutions. During my time as budget co-chair in the North Carolina State Senate, I learned 2 things. First, it's never easy to craft a budget. There are always tough choices to make. And second, our fiscal challenges can only be met if Republicans and Democrats have that commitment to work together. Despite the impression the American people may have based on what they've seen in recent weeks, I know we can work this out. We have to work together, because after we come to an agreement on this year's budget, we must buckle down and chart out a comprehensive bipartisan path to rein in our nearly $10 trillion national debt. I believe we all share the common goal of reducing this year's deficit, but the national debt will not disappear with one bill or in one year alone. It will take a comprehensive and long-term approach that moves beyond a singular focus on domestic discretionary spending. That's why I remain concerned by some of the cuts passed by the House, and especially by the dozens of divisive policy writers that are disrupting our ability to chart a pragmatic and responsible fiscal course for our country. And it's why I remain concerned that we are holding up government funding with threats to take away vital health care to millions of American women who could not otherwise afford them. These health services include Pap tests, breast cancer screenings, birth control, STD testing, and treatment. And these services, which are funded through Title X, were signed into law by President Nixon and supported by George H.W. Bush. And according to independent, nonpartisan studies, every $1 spent on these family planning services saves $4. And is that not what we are supposed to be working on, reducing the amount of our government spending? These proposals are the only thing standing between a reasonable bipartisan compromise and an irresponsible government shutdown. If such a shutdown does occur, we risk delivering a crippling blow now to our already fragile economic recovery. More than 1,000 American small business owners who are already facing difficulty securing the borrowing they need to expand and add jobs could see their SBA-backed loans delayed. You know, we have 368 national parks in our country. Millions of dollars will be lost to the businesses surrounding those parks if we shut down the government. In April of 2010 alone, in North Carolina, more than 1.3 million people visited the national parks and spent millions of dollars. These parks include the Great Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge Parkway, Cape Hatteras National Seashore, and others. Tourism in North Carolina is one of our state's largest industries. In 2010, tourists spent $17 billion across our state, and the tourism industry supports 185,000 jobs for North Carolinians. More than 40,000 businesses in North Carolina provide direct services to travelers. And if we close our national parks, these small businesses are at risk of losing customers, losing money, which will make it much more difficult for my state to recover from this tough economy. And we risk putting even more pressure on our already shaky mortgage market by preventing thousands of homeowners from receiving a loan to buy a new house. And as a senator from North Carolina, I'm particularly alarmed about the impact a government shutdown would have on our courageous military personnel and their families who have dedicated their lives to this country. Just 2 weeks ago, Marines from North Carolina rescued with amazing speed and skill the American F-15 pilot that went down east of Benghazi in Libya. Last week, I spoke with Marine Corps Commandant General Amos on the amazing work of these North Carolina Marines, and he told me it took only 90 minutes from start to finish to rescue the F-15 pilot. These warriors are heroes, as are the 120,000 active duty troops in North Carolina and approximately 400,000 American troops who are deployed overseas, including 90,000 troops in Afghanistan and 45,000 troops in Iraq. These heroes and their families do not deserve to have partisan bickering jeopardize their financial stability. More than a third of the people in my state are either in the military, a veteran, or have an immediate family member who is in the military or a veteran. So if the government shuts down and we delay paychecks to our military personnel, it's not just our courageous servicemen and women whose livelihoods are affected, but those of their spouses and their children. And I know that nobody in this body wants to see that happen. Whether you represent a state with a large military population or not, we are all incredibly grateful for the sacrifices our military personnel and their families give this country every day. Earlier this week, I co-sponsored the bipartisan Ensuring Pay for Our Military, sponsored by my Republican colleague from Texas, Senator Hutchinson, which would prevent an interruption in pay for members of the military if there is a government shutdown. This is an important bill, a must-do bill, but I sincerely hope it is an unnecessary bill. The American people want members of Congress to work across party lines, avoid an irresponsible government shutdown, and move forward on a sound, comprehensive, and bipartisan plan to put our fiscal house in order. The American people don't care if it's a Republican plan or a Democratic plan. They just want it to be a good plan for our country. And that's why this week I signed on to the biennial budgeting bill, which is being led by my Republican colleague, Senator Isaacson, and my Democratic colleague, Senator Shaheen. This bill, which will move the federal budget funding process, is a common-sense, bipartisan approach, which will hopefully improve the partisan political bickering. I urge my colleagues to come together now and fund our servicemen and women, our VA doctors, our Head Start programs, and our women's health care so we can move on to the nation's #1 priority, which is tackling our unsustainable national debt. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
A senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak for 15 minutes.
Is there any objection? No objection.
Mr. President, I rose yesterday to talk about the consequences of a budget shutdown, and I rise again today, hours away from facing that reality. And what I cannot understand for the life of me, Mr. President, is having agreed to $78 billion in cuts, more than almost 80% of the way of where our Republican colleagues originally stated they wanted to be. Last time I checked in a negotiation, when someone comes 80% of the way to where you are, you've done rather well. And yet, even in the face of having made those very deep cuts, some which will clearly affect major services delivered to individuals in this country, but coming together for the understanding of what is necessary to both get this budget year done and being able to begin to significantly reduce the deficit, it's still not enough. Why? Why? Because of a driving force in the House of Representatives on the Republican side that insists on social issues that have nothing to do with the budget and keeping the nation's business open and making sure this economy stays on track and growing jobs and putting families back to work. Now, I'll talk about what that issue is in just a minute, but again, I want to revisit that this isn't about some museums closing on the mall, even though that in and of itself has a tourism effect and a dollar effect on our economy to all those places throughout the country that would be closed down. This is about businesses here in America. Today, the New York Times gave examples of that. It talked about the manufacturing executive whose companies supply goods to federal agencies, the bank loan officers who make mortgages guaranteed by the FHA, which is one of the greatest block drivers of mortgages to be done for middle-class working families. The Wall Street analyst who depends on the steady flow of government data. The federal government is in and of itself a major driver of the economy and a ripple effect to businesses across the spectrum in our country, and pulls the plug on the other businesses in America that at the end of the day means jobs and at the end of the day means a consequence to this fragile economic recovery. That's why the Chamber of Commerce has come out against the shutdown. That's why the Business Roundtable has talked about it. These are voices of those entities that clearly speak with a one-vision business sense, and they say a shutdown does not make good business sense for America. All, however, risked for some social issues. When the government shut down in 1995, the last time that Republicans shut down the United States government, let's not forget that. I was there in the House of Representatives when that happened. The last time Republicans shut the government down for their ideological views, the nation's economic growth was slowed by as much as 1% in that quarter, a full percent. Mr. President, in an economy that is in recovery, and recovery, I would remind people, from where we were to where we are, I think there's a little history that we need to remember. I remember in the Clinton years when Democrats balanced the budget for the first time in a generation, created record surpluses, low unemployment, low interest rates, and the greatest peacetime economy in over a generation. We had surpluses. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, said we're looking at a 10-year outlook that's bright. We were actually years away from not only balancing the budget but from ending debt, and here we are. What happened in between? Tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the country under President Bush, 2 wars unpaid for, a Medicare prescription drug benefit unpaid for, Wall Street allowed to go run wild, and we went from a surplus with projections of 5.6 trillion surpluses by 2011 to the challenges that we have today. So I know that people want to forget the past, but the past is in part the reality of our present challenges. And so at a time in this fragile economic recovery where we are ultimately meeting the challenges of global events that also affect us here at home, the unrest in the Middle East, the driving up of oil prices, which drive up gasoline prices, which drive up commodity prices, which drive up food prices, and therefore has a consequence not only to every American at the pump but also at the supermarket and in their lives, and has a collective consequence to our economy. What's happened in Japan and whether they will be able to send supplies and some of the most critical elements of our economy here in the technology field. The millions of Americans still looking for work, and we're going to give it a domestic body blow. All because of social issues. All because of social issues. Mr. President, that doesn't make sense, and it's not necessary. And it is not necessary. We could have consequences to the markets. The Asian markets, if we close down this government, don't open up, the Asian markets on Sunday will begin, and that begins setting a trend throughout the globe. This has real consequences to our economy here at home. It's amazing to me that we'd have those who wear the uniform of the United States fighting halfway around the globe, and they'll continue to fight for their country, but they would not be paid. They'll earn the pay, and eventually they'll get it, but while they're in the field, they wouldn't get the pay. And how about their families here back at home who already suffer not having them with them? All because we are driven by the Republican voices in the House of Representatives over a program called Title X. What is Title X? Title X is a law signed by President Nixon and ultimately had as one of its strongest supporters when he was in the House of Representatives former President Bush to provide life-saving health care services for women. Now, some of those voices continue to falsely say that this is about abortion. The federal law is very clear. No federal dollars can go for abortion services. No federal dollars can go for abortion services. This is about an array of confidential preventative health services, from pregnancy testing to screening for cervical and breast cancer, to screening for high blood pressure, anemia, diabetes, screening for STDs, including HIV, basic infertility services, health education. This is about the very essence of a woman's ability to get health care if she does not have the wherewithal on her own financial condition to be able to go to a doctor. And so there are many institutions, by the way, including Catholic and religious institutions, that receive Title X money. And I am sure no one would claim that they are producing abortion services. Now, why, when we are looking at the very essence of whether it be my daughter or anyone else's daughter in America or anybody's wife or mother, why is it that we must drive an ideologically driven issue in the midst of a budget debate? A budget debate is about numbers, and it is about making sure services are continued, and it is making sure that the economy continues to prosper, and it is about getting people back to work, but it isn't about certainly using an ideological view that somehow this program that ultimately helps women have preventative health care services is somehow an abortion issue, when the law clearly says it cannot be under any circumstances. Why would we deny women in this country the ability to have the health care that they need so that they can be healthy, so that they continue to prosper, so that their families can continue to have that mother, that breadwinner, the person who holds that family together, be healthy? I cannot imagine for the life of me that we will shut the government down based on those issues. But that is, in fact, where we're at, Mr. President. Now, when I look at that and I look at the other elements of what has recently been discussed as a prelude, this is just the opening salvo of a debate that will continue on. Hopefully, we will have a vote, Mr. President. I am ready to vote to keep this government open. I am ready to vote to make sure that those who wear the uniform of the United States are paid when they are committing the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of their country. But more importantly, I would like to be able to vote to have $78 billion worth of cuts and at the same time make sure that this economy continues to move forward, continues to grow, continues to put people back to work. So as we are ready, and I hope that cooler minds can prevail in the House, that the ideological views can be told it's not for a budget debate, have that debate some other time, have those votes if you want another time, that's fine. But do not hold us hostage. Do not hold the nation hostage to that issue. But I see that as only the beginning of what is a broader plan, and is another reason why we need to get this budget done so we can move to that other plan in the next fiscal year. Mr. President, could I find out how much time I have? And I would commend to my colleagues, as we look at that plan, the column written by Paul Krugman today, a Nobel Prize recipient, who entitled "Ludicrous and Cruel." And basically, he talks about the Ryan plan that privatizes Medicare, that has large tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the country, that ultimately doesn't do either one of the things that they suggest. In this column, which I commend to my colleagues, he says, quote, "In past, Mr. Ryan has talked a good game about taking care of those in need, like Medicare and seniors and Medicaid for children. But as the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities point out, of the $4 trillion in spending cuts he proposes over the next decade, 2/3 involve cutting programs that mainly serve low-income Americans." And then he goes on to say that it is a continuation of the voodoo economics of the tax cuts to the wealthiest people in the country that supposedly are going to create prosperity, and we saw that simply wasn't the case. What it did do is do a big part of unraveling the Clinton surpluses that Democrats helped to create and drive an enormous amount of the debt that we are realizing and debating on today. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that that column be included in the record.